This is chapter 8. We're on page 211. I think this is 131 docuseries,
What's the date?
and the date is July 11th, 2024, and the title is officially Gene, Sonatas, and Bombers, but I nicknamed chapter 8 title as The Shame on Kimberly-Clark. So I'll continue. As we entered the lounge, we could see that it was furnished as a medieval castle might have been. This is in Haverfordwest with Gene, Rowan Young. There were large iron statues in the form of knights and squires distributed about the room. The ceiling was expansive and decorative with huge wooden beams spanning its entire length. Suspended from the ceiling were huge crystalline chandeliers illuminating the entire room in a subdued light. Jean ordered tea and crumpets, and I peered as she sat there with her legs crossed, admiring the display on the two outside walls. The atmosphere was subtle and quiet, with the playing of a background music by cathedral organ, with Jean found to her liking and interest. We sat there and talked mostly of small things, her work, her family, and mostly about the end of the war. Not once did she mention her interest in music or the playing of the cathedral organ in the background. I found it also feasible and tactful not to bring it up. I still did not have a ready solution to her desire to pursue a musical education. She mentioned that she had no definite plans and after the war, but to continue what she was doing now, working in her father's office and meeting new people now and then. She also stated that sheer joy and relief of ending the war would make the most commonplace event seem anything but trivial. She asked me of my plans, and I also said I had nothing definite in mind, but to get through the war's events first and then decide after I was discharged. She never pressed me to talk about my family, nor did she say at any time anything about my fears about going into combat. She did ask if I would write to her if all possible, and I gave her assurance that I would write to her as often as I could. With that, she took my hand and squeezed it as she held it firmly. This was beginning quite familiar, having gone through the same nostalgic event with Anne, only to be saddened by her departure, not knowing when we would ever see each other again. This time around did not make it any less. With all playing Old Lang Syne on the cathedral organ, after talking for several hours, we departed the castle lounge and were once again in the midst of Castle Square. It was getting late and we began looking about for a cab to take us back up the hill. Jean spotted one and I held it down. Having forgotten the address, I relied on Jean to tell the driver where to go. In a relatively short time, we arrived at the front gate of Jean's cottage. As she stood there observing, "Hi, old friend. Take care. Take care." As we, in a relatively short time, arrived at the gate of Jean's cottage. As she stood there observing the bomber formation overhead, I reached behind her, put her arms around her waist, and kissed her on the neck and cheek. We stood there until the formation was out of sight. but we could still hear the drone of the powerful jet engines in the distance. She turned toward me and almost in a whisper sighed, "Aren't you frightened to be going in that direction, especially on ground?" With some reluctance, I shrugged my shoulders and exclaimed, "Certainly I'm frightened over it, but what can I do about it? That's what I got stuck with, and that's just have to try and make the best of the bad situation." With that, she gasped and grasped me tightly and held on to me with her head buried into my chest. I then asked her if I might come and visit each evening around 19 to 1,200 hours. 2,000 hours to chat with her parents and her. She smiled with approval and wanted, She smiled with approval and wanted to know how I managed to coming each night. I then gave her my plan I have been developing over a period of time.
Where are you going with the keys?
Mail.
Oh. I thought you checked the mail already.
No, not yet. I then proceeded to inform her of my devious plan. I would leave the billet area nightly with the pretext of going for a shower. Since the shower building was halfway to her place, I would shower then walk up to her place. By going to the shower building, I did not have to sign in or out, but was freed up for several hours. She kissed me and said that was a conniver, but an adorable conniver. She liked the plan and her parents would be pleased to have me by company nightly. Did that plan work?
Right.
You said you're going to the showers, and then after the shower, you would go to Jean's house.
Yeah, and we're close up the hill. Yeah.
It worked really well, right?
Yeah. I got the pass and everything.
Yeah. She said that you're an adorable conniver. We looked up as another bombers headed for the channel, this time escorted by British Spitfires, with their bluish flame jetting out of their exhaust. We listened as they got out of sight. After a while, even the sound lost as they reached the channel. The drone of Spitfires and the eerie exhaust sent a chill throughout my body in anticipation of what lay ahead of me in a very short time. When you were in combat, did you see a lot of Spitfires?
No.
No.
No, actually, no. They were around the cities.
And you were in the
big cities, yeah.
You were in the country.
Yeah.
Okay. I turned to face Jean as I looked upon her, and she appeared all sensual and inviting. With her loneliness, all I entered my consciousness was that I desired her in intensity pent up in my body. Okay, we're going to miss a couple paragraphs here. I kissed Jean goodnight and thanked her for a great and memorable weekend, saying that she looked beautiful tonight and I appreciated and felt privileged that she would make as much of an effort to please me. I would always remember how she looked tonight and how my most innermost desires. She looked up at me and her eyes told me everything I wanted to know. I read them perfectly. As she turned towards a cottage, she whispered, "Don't forget tomorrow night. I'm looking forward to it." With that, she ran to the front door, turned and waved, and disappeared inside. Walking back to the billets, I again reviewed the day's events. Once again, considered myself fortunate to have met a woman like Jean. I was not confused as I had been with Anne, and perhaps it was due to the fact I did not feel much undue pressure from Jean as I had from Anne. In any event, it was too late to try to sort out the two happenings. All I knew for sure was Jean took one day at a time and was grateful for the appreciative for that. She did not, nor did Anne, probe or seek anything beyond that. Both were content to be together for the little time we had left. For the next 2.5 weeks, I executed my plan with perfection, with only one serious exception. Toward the end of the first week, while at Jean's, just before the start of the BBC newscast, I was overcome by a stomach illness. Not wishing to embarrass my host, and mostly myself, I made up the excuse I must return to the billets, but would return momentarily. Hurrying down to the shower building and latrine area, I made it just in time. It was more ways than imaginable. It appeared that Sergeant Whalen was looking for me and could not locate me. Mail? What is it?
Junk mail.
Give it to him. Give it to him. Here's your mail. Mail call.
Oh, Christmas. Come on.
It appeared that Sergeant Whalen was looking for me and could not locate me. Fink, by accident, found me in the latrine and relayed the message to me. Fink did mention that he did search the shower area, but he did not see me there. I replied I had gone outside the building for some fresh air. Upon my return to the orderly room, Sergeant Whalen informed me that I had an urgent telegram. I immediately became apprehensive and mystified regarding its contents. My inclination was about home, Mother and Sally. Upon opening the telegram, I read, "Have a merry and safe Christmas. All the best for the new year. Signed, Love, Ann." I was relieved at its contents, but also left with pangs of guilt and remorse. I felt intensely that I had betrayed Ann and our sincere and loving relationship.
Sincere
Noticed my
loving
despair and asked,
behavior.
"Bad news?" I quickly rejoined, saying, "No, it's not a telegram from home, but I guess I got a little homesick reading it." He nodded and left the room. After I recovered sufficiently, I decided not to go to Jean's that afternoon. Instead, I wrote several letters to Ann and Mother and Sally. For all my good intentions, I could not help thinking about Jean and all that we were missing, and so little time left. Minutes?
What?
17.
Oh, shit. Fink noticed my despair and asked, "Bad news." After breakfast the next morning, we had completed a weapons check. Along with a thorough equipment inspection.
What did you have to do with a weapons check?
What was a weapons check about?
Weapons, check your weapons. They're going to be shipping out pretty soon.
And we
Take it
retest,
apart, clean it up, put it back together.
you had to take apart the weapons completely?
Yeah.
I had connotations of serious nature. Captain Dreward was present along with Battalion Commander Colonel Drain. How was Colonel Drain?
Not even saving them much. Office guy.
It had all the markings of a final phase-out, and our stay here in Haverfordwest preparation from our crossing of the Channel. After inspection, I approved Fink regarding my up the hill to see Jean. At first he smiled slightly upon hearing my plan for a nightly pass without signing in and out, but then he finally agreed with my deception and said that he would cover for me in the event of another episode like last night. We agreed to take a fast walk up the hill to Jean's cottage before chow that night, so he would know my exact location. I thanked him for his discretion, and he only smiled and said he'd be accompanying me shortly. That night I gathered some items I had saved from the PX rations, an assortment of chocolate bars, chewing gums, and some canned Spam, several tins of hard candy, shaving cream, and 5 to 6 packs of razors, and a couple fountain pens and pencils. The items in Wales and England were rationed or non-existent during this time I spent there. I knew Jean and her parents would appreciate them, and unquestionably a small token of repayment for all their kindness they had shown me. That night, on my way to the shower building, I carried along my overnight bag in which I put the PX rations for Youngs. It was inconspicuous, and most everyone carried bags of some sort to the shower and a change of clothes, a towel and shaving articles. It was mostly concerned about the chocolate melting in the warm environment of the shower, and I hurried my shower as quickly as possible. Upon reaching Jean's cottage, I quickly opened the gate and walked up the short cobblestone entrance and gave the large brass knocker several bangs. Jean came to the door quickly and was elated and jubilant at seeing me. She remarked, "I thought you had shipped out and could not return to say goodbye." I smiled and replied that we had an inspection last night and it was too late to return afterward. Hello, take care. With that, she ushered me into the parlor where Mr. and Mrs. Young greeted me. Mrs. Young said I was just in time for tea. We talked for a while until the news came at 2100 hours from London. Jean sat beside me and held my hand. It reminded me of Anne and her telegram. Once again, pangs of guilt overcame me. It was only when Mrs. Young handed me a cup of hot tea that I recovered to bring myself back to reality in the company of Jean and her parents. We discussed the latest events while Jean kept mostly silent and just listened intently as what was said. After a bit, I reached for my overnight bag and began to empty the contents onto the coffee table near me. Jean looked in amazement, and the Youngs were beside themselves at the sight of seeing sugar and canned Spam. How would they cook the canned Spam?
How do they cook with canned Spam?
Yeah.
Like the sausage.
Okay.
Not as good.
No? I felt happy for them and was grateful that I could contribute something to their dreary life a little bit more cheerful and effective. As I watched them handling the various items I brought for them, I could not help thinking how fortunate we were back in the States not to go through the pain and suffering these people were enduring.
Yeah, that was regular.
They could not thank me enough, and after many accolades, I felt embarrassed and tried to steer them into another subject. It was at this moment that Mrs. Young brought out some of her Welsh fruitcake she made this summer for the coming holidays. It was savory and delectable, and I remarked that it was much a richer prize than all the articles I had brought her tonight. We all laughed, and I felt good that I brought some joy and goodwill to the very sincere and loving family. I did not appreciate the full significance of that joyous evening until Christmas actually came upon me on the frozen ground of the Ardennes several weeks later. After several hours of pleasurable company and goodwill, I informed Jean it's getting late and I had to return. She understood and said my good nights to the Youngs and stated I hope I would see them tomorrow night if that was amendable with them. Then Mrs. Young did something I would remember for a very long time. She hugged and kissed me, held me momentarily, and thank you and may God be with you always. I was overcome with emotion and quickly departed outside as Jean followed behind. As we got outside, I murmured to Jean in a hoarse, barely audible voice that her parents, as well as herself, would make it tough to leave this pleasant little town. She held my hand, and we started to walk to the end of the street. As usual, the bombers...
I had a
Shut it
little
off?
pee.
Okay, shut it off.
All right,
Shut it
knock it down, knock it down.